Please understand the context. It's the 1960s. I was fortunate enough to attend at Westminster School down at Marion. And I guess I put my hand up for a few leadership roles, and that's probably because I had some parents who were fairly hard-working, dedicated. It's probably because I had a housemaster who really took an interest in me and encouraged me, and as did the headmaster. There came a point, though, when they offered something else in the school, and they said, fine, look, what we're doing is we're offering a Rotary Exchange Student Scholarship to the US. Now, bear in mind that for a guy like me, I'd never been out of Australia. In fact, the only plane trip I had taken was from Adelaide to Kangaroo Island in a DC-3. It was a stretch for me. And when I got to the US, my parents farewelled me and my sister farewelled me, and by the way, she does attend Unley Park Baptist. And what was interesting, I got to the US, my first host family said, well, we want to treat you to something special, and they took me to a French restaurant. Now, bear in mind that for me, pies and pasties on Sunday was a real treat. And if you're really, really special, you got fish and chips on the way home, and they wrapped it in an appetizer that was about that big. You remember the sheets? And that was a treat. I never went to a restaurant because restaurants, you see, the only places you found those were inside a hotel, and you didn't go inside hotels. So here am I in the US, a French restaurant. And they said to me, this is a special treat for you, Darryl. A very special treat. I'm sure you'll enjoy these. I'm sure you'll really feel that these are something quite special. It was years later, that I came up with a quote that I found that resonated deeply with me in relation to courage. And the quote was this: "It must have taken a lot of courage to discover that frogs' legs were edible." You know, I got it. I got it. The little boy from Glenelg East had to eat frogs' legs in a strange place in the US. I'm glad someone else discovered it before I did. So what is life about? What is it about? Well, George Bernard Shaw, of course, he's got a lot to say about most things, but he said this: "The true joy in life is being used for a purpose recognised by yourself as a mighty one. The being thoroughly worn out before you are thrown on the scrap heap, the being a force of nature, instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." What is all that about? Well, for me, as a psychologist, it's about the purpose and the words mighty one. It's about having a purpose, because all of us in life need a purpose, and the purpose is to serve the mighty one. And it's about serving, in a sense, until you wear out. And it's about serving others. Poets always have something to say about that, and this poet was no exception. He said, "We're here on earth to do good for others. What the others are here for, I don't know." But exactly how do we do good? Well, let me take you on a brief journey, and some of you may have seen it on the YouTube clip. Basically, let me introduce you to something called the comfort zone. We all know that zone, don't we? It's our friends, it's our family, it's our church, it's the route we take to work and home again. It's the same. We know it, it's familiar, it's comfortable. Very comfortable. And tonight, we might be a little bit outside that zone because we might be meeting and greeting with people we don't quite know. You may not have been to this venue before. You've got people, for heaven's sake, like Fergus running around loose with a microphone. It's just a little bit edgy. But most of the time, we are in the comfort zone. But there is something else that surrounds that zone, and it's called the courage zone. It is that area just outside our normal feelings of safety and security, of comfort, and it's a little bit anxious out there. It's just a little bit anxious. It's the courage zone where things are just a little different. We're not as settled. We're not as calm. We're not as secure. Now, what's interesting about this courage zone is that if in fact you venture forth in one area of the comfort zone, you step outside that zone in one little area. For example, you might decide that you want to learn to be a public speaker. You might decide you want to learn a new skill like dancing. You might decide you want to learn cooking or be a connoisseur in some way. You step outside, you attend a lecture, you do a course, you are then in the courage zone. You step up, you step out, you try something different. You behave differently. Now, what's interesting about that, if you step out in one area, just in one area, a miracle happens. What indeed happens is your comfort zone gets extended right around the circle. Does that make sense? You learn to be a public speaker in one area and you'll find your confidence lifts in a whole bunch of others. You learn to cook well in one area and you'll find that gravitates out to having repercussions and a flow-on in lots of other areas. It's amazing what happens when you step out. But what's so important about this courage zone? Really, what is it that's so important? Well, basically, the fact is that this is the zone where you grow. You find lots of variety there, lots of variety, and it's what I call the juice of living. The juice of living. And what you'll find is those who step into that comfort zone, as we heard from Peter earlier on and his company, and for all of you in the room, when you step into that zone and you achieve and you're successful, you'll often hear people say to you, gee, you're a lucky whatever. Boy, you're lucky. Mate, how did you get so damn lucky? And you look at them and you think, you know what? This is not luck. This is because I stretched myself and I went outside the comfort zone into something called the courage zone. It's the zone of anxiety. It's the zone where you're going to be unsettled. It's the zone that's going to get up your nose a bit, but it's the one where you grow. And anything, folks, that doesn't grow on the planet, thank you, dies. I didn't make up that rule. You know that rule. Anything that doesn't grow on the planet dies. And we're about growing. mentally, physically, spiritually, in every facet of our life. Because we don't, it dies. And someone once said something I thought was quite profound. They said this: the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of courage that you can comfortably live with. Think about that. Think about that. Courage. But where in life do we need to really show most courage? What's the one area that typically demands it from us? Well, certainly in terms of relationships. Life is relationships, the rest is just details. So says someone with some credentials. But what stops us in relationships? What stops us from connecting? What stops us from engaging with others? Well, sometimes we're ticked off with them. Sometimes we're annoyed. Sometimes we're irritated. But sometimes we don't connect because we experience fear, anxiety. It's just too risky. But fear, what does that stand for? What's the acronym for fear? Thank you, Ingo. Indeed it is. False evidence appearing real. What does that really mean? That means that most of the time when we experience fear, we're hallucinating. We made it up. I remember my Year 9 teacher in physics, Mr. Phillips, said once in class, I didn't remember anything about physics, but I do remember him saying, 9 out of 10 things you worry about never happen. And I thought, oh, and then I didn't do my homework one night. I didn't get caught. And then I did something else and it didn't happen. I went, wow, 9 out of 10. He could be close to the mark. Because the fear that I was experiencing didn't eventuate in the end in terms of the consequences. I made up stories. And often the stories I made up started with what if? What if I stuff up? What if I make a mistake? What if I blow it? What if ... fill in the blank? And we experience fear. Is it real fear? Yes, it is fear because we feel it in its reality, but it's made up according to what we have imagined. And when it comes to people, and when it comes to the gospel, how is it we experience that fear? Well, that false evidence, where does it come from? Well, in the first instance, it comes from the fact that we want to please others and be liked. It's a basic need, it's a basic driver. But we feel it would be dreadful if they didn't like us. It would be awful if they thought something ill of us. Often it's imagined. What else do we say to ourselves? We say, well, you know, I've got to do it perfectly. It's got to look good. It's got to be right. And overall, when we say this, it stops us from connecting because we might look silly, foolish, an idiot, out of place, and it would make us feel very uncomfortable if that was the case. But you know, what's fascinating is the Bible has much to say and offer in relation to courage. And of course, it lines up with all the aspects of living as we know it. No surprises there. But you know, for example, when God's people in the Old Testament were about to take the promised land, they're about to move, but in order to move forward, there were nations in front of them. But God promised them to Moses and to Joshua. He made a promise and he said this: be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, For it is the Lord your God who goes with you, and he will not leave you nor forsake you. And as far as I understand, God doesn't break his promises. You and I might, but he's not in that business. And then again in the New Testament, Jesus put it another way as he talked to his disciples and his followers. And he said, and do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Does that put it into some sort of perspective? Well, it certainly does for me. So where does that lead us? Well, we come back to the CBF ingredients for how we move in the workplace, that it's about mobilising and it's about equipping. So it's having the skills to engage with people's questions. Engaging is inviting not yet Christians to events to help them engage. It's following up, as you've heard tonight, challenging not yet Christians to check out the Christian story by reading the gospel or reading a book. And so it's really important to understand that as we move into the courage zone, that we move into these areas with those around us. One of the ways I've found at a fairly simplistic level that it's convenient for me to move into that courage zone when I engage with people and when I talk to people about Christian things is certainly to just ask and to listen. I don't know about you, but I think there's only about 2 or 3 people in my life who I could really say are really, really effective listeners. I mean, really effective listeners. I mean, one of them was so darn good, I married her. And then I've got a couple of mates who I think are really very good at that. So it's a gift to be able to listen to people. But to ask questions of people is very powerful. Because when you ask a question, you immediately elicit a response in their head. Their brain can't help itself, because the brain is there to answer questions. And if you ask a question of your colleagues or friends in the workplace, their brain immediately seeks to find an answer. So questions are very, very powerful. So let me ask you a question. So what does it mean for you to move from comfort to courageous? What does it mean for you? And how could CBF assist you? How could that happen? Look, I'm not an exemplar of courage. I'm not up here saying that I am indeed representative of all of this at all. Afraid not. But I will say there have been 1 or 2 instances when I've been, well, I'm not sure what I've been, but I've certainly stepped outside the zone. And I remember doing honours psychology at Flinders. And we had a program there where we were asked to give a 2-hour seminar on a topic of our choice. Now, folks, we're talking about the early 70s. And at that stage, in the early 70s, understand the context, psychology was very much about behavioural psychology. And you and I are just the sum of our behaviours. That's it, full stop, end of story. And we don't bother with anything unobservable that takes place in our minds. Or at that point, psychology was just Freudianism. It was all about events in childhood and the unconscious. And there was also a little bit about Gestalt psychology, and I won't go into that, but it wasn't until the year 2000 that I actually found a psychology book that started to talk about the spiritual dimension. And he said this, and it's Ken Wilber in the book Integral Psychology. He said the spiritual dimension was nothing but, at that stage, in the 70s, a wish fulfilment of infantile needs, a la Freud. It was nothing but an opaque ideology for oppressing the masses, a la Marx. Or it was nothing but a projection of human potentials, a la Freudenbach. So, psychology at that stage was at a very different place than now. So what did I choose for my seminar topic? I chose spirituality and spiritual conversion. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you that I got a high D for that. But I'd really be more truthful if I said it was the most excruciating 2 hours of my total life. Hugely excruciating, given the context of psychology at the time. A little bit later on, I attended a Bible school for 18 months, 4 nights a week. But you know how difficult it is when people say, "Did you see Peyton Place last night?" And I said, "Well, actually, no, I was at Bible school." "Would you like to come along to the association dinner that we're having?" "No, I'm sorry, I'm attending Bible school." They can either shut down a conversation in a split second or open one up. There's no in-betweens when it comes to that. Right now, what do? I talk to people about purpose. I talk to leaders about purpose. Because one thing that people want to know is, why am I here on this planet? Am I just taking up oxygen and space? Or am I here for something else? What is my purpose? And the business leaders that I talk to, both here, interstate, places like Ireland, Dubai, and so forth, want to know the one question about what is my purpose and how am I going to make a difference. If that's not a courage conversation and an exhilarating one, I don't know what is. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.